I'm back already.
Second watch. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the second watch. I think this is our sixth session. Um, Looking forward to having a good friend of ours on this evening. Brian, welcome. What's going on, man?
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Um, Gary, how's your week been?
Everything's great, but Brian, before we started this, you were loud as shit, and now all of a sudden you're trying to act all demure. Hey, how's
Well,
your
I just don't want to mess up whatever the rhythm and routine because look, let's
there?
just be
There
honest.
is no rhythm in routine. So, uh, for those of you that have been here before, usually it's just me and Matt. Brian, Matt, and I used to do a podcast, which I have tried to scrub. I listened back to it, and we were not good. Mostly me, mostly me. I've tried to scrub it from history. I don't think I have though.
You
Anyway,
shouldn't.
so no, I shouldn't. But Brian, welcome, welcome to Second Watch. It's good to have you here. Um, that, I don't know. That's about it. I talked to
Well,
you
I
last
wanted
time.
to.
It's
Yeah,
not
well,
that
I wanted
special.
to.
I talked to you.
Well, I wanted to actually go in a little bit more detail to the old days, the how the three of us actually got to know each other. This was the halcyon, imagine if you will, the halcyon bygone days of the coronavirus when everyone's locked away, trying to figure out what to do with themselves. And I'm on who was it? Professor Dungeon Master's Facebook page, and this random guy goes, "Hey, anybody want to start a podcast?" And that was Gary.
I was so
And
bored, and I heard everybody. I heard everybody was starting podcasts. I was like, "Fuck it, I'll start a podcast."
so I was like, "Fuck it, I have no idea what to do." So I, signed up, and Brian, so did you, and sort of like uh, an awesome friendship was sort of born. Like we had a lot of fun. I think we only recorded for like 9 months or something like that before Texas opened up, and you guys had to get back to work. And
Yeah,
I'm in New
baby.
York. We were locked down for a little while longer. But
God, that was half a decade ago.
I know it's crazy, right?
It's
Nah, was it?
surreal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, and I want to say probably
Oh
we landed
wow.
somewhere around like 10 or 11 episodes, almost a dozen. And as much as Gary wants to nuke it from orbit, there was just some really fun epiphanies, brainstorming, and reflections at a really unique time in the hobby. And I think we all benefited from it.
I do. I will say this. I do think it was a time in the hobby where we were seeing a lot of. There was. I feel like there were a lot of games coming out that weren't D20, and there was a lot of different ideas about gamings floating about, and so we were just in those conversations, you know. But I do think there was. I think now people are pretty settled into what they play. Um, I think it's a different time than it was 5 years ago. I think the battle lines have been drawn, flags have been planted,
Yeah.
and
Right?
you
Right.
know, and that's where you're at. So I know we've Matt. I know you really want to get to the topic.
Well,
So,
yeah, well,
well, the
yes.
reason I
Yes and
say
no.
that is because I was about to open up a can of worms with Brian that could take us all night to close.
Oh my
Well,
God.
well,
Um,
well, what is it?
Brian, would you please tell our dear viewers what it is that you do as a side gig for extra cash?
Um, I feel like I'm about to get hazed. I'm just waiting for more of this stuff. All right. And Gary's like, I got him now. I got him, right in the crosshairs. I'm very fortunate. I do have, I've run a few paid groups in Houston with a group of individuals who, for many of them, they lead very high stress lives. They work, in law enforcement, first responders. They work at a lot of high pressure gigs, and I have the blessing to be compensated. So they throw a couple $100 to $250 a session, or buy me
A
laptop.
session. Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I had to say something. That's incredible. Listen, I'm not I'm not gonna get on your ass for that, dude. I would if anybody was like, hey man, we need a regular GM and everybody's just too busy and we know you're really into it. Dude, we'll throw you a couple bills. Hell yeah. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. No problem there. I am a capitalist.
I think it was mainly though done out of greed on their. I was running like 3 or 4 different things at the time, 3 or 4 different campaigns, and some of them I was a couple of years into each one, and I think it was kind of like we want to monopolize his time, and because they
Word.
know I'm very manic about prep and about really investing in what we're all creating. And I think they were just like, man, let's give him some money to do it, and he'll buy more stuff to do the thing he loves. And
That
yeah,
yo,
that's like
I think look, man, that you've got Patreon without them taking a cut. I mean, that's the way this works. You're never gonna find. Look, dude, I've played guitar for peanuts for years, and I play now that nobody's throwing peanuts at me,
for
so
the
I
love of the
get it.
game, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, the idea that doing something you love, it should be foreboding for you to make a little side cash off it is bullshit, especially if it's been recognized in your general social circles that you run a good game, you are in demand, will buy his time. You know what I mean? Like that's what a job is. They're buying your time, right?
The
So
first few sessions, it felt though a little mercenarial, and it was hard to kind of go through the transition of like, okay, I'm being compensated. And we've all seen probably feedback from people who've run paid games and gone through that evolution, because you don't ever want your hobby to become your job, dot dot dot, and all of that. um, when you start really thinking of it as a service, and I was born out of retail, Blockbuster and GameStop management and such, so it's like you kind of approach it from a different way, from a sense of duty. um, and I think that probably ultimately what I really learned was it never wound up ever feeling like a chore. It felt like a paid charity. I don't
yeah.
know. I mean, yeah, maybe
Well,
it's.
as it's interesting, and I don't. There's a lot of questions that I think chat what could ask or that we could go into. But what I really want, and maybe we can do that, another time or at the end of the podcast. But tonight we wanted to talk about a couple things, and because you GM so much and you do it from a different angle, you're providing a service, right? So what I think we might have vastly different takes on the things that are about to be said. Um, Go ahead, man.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, we might. I don't know. Like I think it's great that you have a skill that's valuable enough that people are willing to throw money at you. And dear viewers, I have had the fortune of being a player in Brian's games, and as
Me
is
too.
Gary, and he's definitely worth the money. He's a very, very good game master. And just to kind of go back to the
But we didn't
podcast brief.
pay. We didn't pay. I just want to set the record clear. I didn't give this dude. Nah.
You were a great, you were a great Shadow Cat, Peter Parker. I
I
had
thought
so much fun. I love Marvel 1984. It's a great
yeah,
era.
it
It
was
was
fun.
fun. It was
Yeah.
fun.
But that's the thing too about that, going back to the podcast and the three of us, like each one of us at that time, I'm sure we've evolved since then, really approached the game very differently. And so like our conversations would just be like all over the place, and like you get all these different ideas about how to approach things. And so that's why I'm really glad you're here to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while. And last week's stream with Griff kind of rekindled some ideas that I like. The embers have been burning low. Maybe it's because I've been in this industry a little too long at this point, and I'm just broken on the wheel with all the controversies and the arguments and this, that, and the other thing. But he said what he was saying, and then he had a follow-up video on his YouTube channel the informal game where he was talking about like house rules and making it your own. And I got to tell you, this is going to get me in trouble with the OSR, but I don't mind the designator referee, and I don't mind the designator judge. But I am so much fucking more than that. And I am just tired of this like idea that the game master is just supposed to show up with like this black and white stripe shirt, call balls and strikes and not anything else. I certainly don't like the name storyteller because I think that takes the onus a little too far away from the game aspect. So what is a game master, and how should you be a game master when you're running, or you're more importantly, and this is where I'm going to get into really, this is where we're going to get into the weeds a little bit, when you're preparing for a campaign or a game. And I think we should go back to the idea that the game master is the god of the world, like this creator being. And I know there's a tension there, right? Because we don't, too much rule of cool can break a game, right? And some people who like especially advocate for rules as written, they like to bring up this concept of relativism. Like, well, if you don't abide by the rules as written, what's in the books, you're dabbling in relativism, and that anything goes at that point. And so you have this tension, okay? And I think I may the how I think I can navigate, how I want to navigate that tension, and this is where I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Have you heard of a guy named Saul Kripke? Do you know who he is? He's a philosopher from the, well, I want to say the 50s and 60s, and he was part of this like analytic philosophy movement where there was a lot focused on language and how it forms our conceptual schema. And he came up with this concept called the baptism theory of naming in a book called Naming and Necessity. And the baptism theory basically is the sounds we make, right? The moment we identify something in our reality are completely arbitrary, right? But the moment we make the sound and say that thing is this, then it becomes necessary. So, imagine, caveman, unga, unga. Oh, what's that? Oh, tree. And then from then on out, it's a tree, right? The object of our reality is a tree. And I think what game masters are doing is sort of baptizing their game. They go, hey, I kind of like what's in, I don't have a game book in front of me within reach, but I kind of like what's in first edition Dungeons and Dragons. But this one rule, not too thrilled with it. I also know the players that I'm going to be playing with, they're not too thrilled with it. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to set a game at this time, at this date. I'm going to use this kind of a genre. I'm going to do this kind of a world. We're going to play like this. This is the themes I'm going to work with. And then boom, at that point, that's the game. It's no longer first edition's Dungeons and Dragons. It's DM Cloaker's game. It's Gary's game. It's Lord Mattias's game. So that's, I think, so it's still, and there's still some good advice. Like, you should play rules as written when you're still learning the game, but I don't think a game master should be shackled once they kind of have their book control and they know where to find rules in a book. I think once you know the rules, you should be free to do and baptize the game that you want to play. Thoughts?
Yes, sort of.
Okay.
I got to tell you, I'm in a different headspace than I think I've ever been in my gaming life. I think I told you this, Matt, a couple weeks ago. 2 nights in a row, I had an AirPod in when I fell asleep, and I was listening to Arbiter of Worlds, Macros, and I've really been on this sort of, not necessarily, well, here's the thing, not rules is written, but I don't think I would ever change a rule during the game. We were talking about rule zero, and what I told you is that what I told you about rule zero is that I always thought rule zero was when you have to arbitrate something in the rules because it doesn't really say what's there. Go with what's cool or fun, and then kind of work it out later. That's really kind of how I always looked at rule zero. I think right now that I almost don't care what the reason is. If you are in the game and the rule has been this and you deviate from that because whatever, I think that's bad form. And like if you do it to make the game cooler, that's no. You need to do that needs to happen maybe in between sessions. Um Maybe not at all, depending on the rule and how it might affect a character class. At the same time, I'm not against home rules. There are sometimes things don't make sense or they don't make sense in the context of what you're doing, but those rules need to be established as well, right? I don't want like right now. I have been driving everybody I know crazy talking about this campaign I'm preparing for. This West Marches ish. It's not. I don't. It's mostly a West Marches type thing. And I've been driving everybody crazy talking about it. And a lot of that is me making sure that when people step into that, they know what the rules are, right? Especially, I decided I'm using OSC. There's a lot of options with OSC. What options am I using? What classes am I allowing? Um, and I want to have as much of that set up before the game so I don't have to get into that situation where I have to explain to a player why I changed something, right? I made a crack thing. I didn't think about it that much. I changed it because I thought it would be cool. And now all of a sudden, clerics can unlock doors from 30 yards away, right? And we have to live with that forever. It just, so while I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, I do think that at the table, the rules need to be the rules. And when you change a rule, you might want to run it past your players because they might see some implications that you don't. And that's what I have to say. I'll sit back now.
I want to retort, but Brian,
No,
did you want
please.
to?
Be
Okay,
lawyerly. Come on, bro.
well, allow me to retort.
Yeah, I want to hear your retort because I mean, Gary, what you're alluding to is the danger of creating a precedent. Uh, Whenever we create a precedent in the game, it can wind up becoming something that it can eat its own tail, and it will do it at times that you don't expect. And if we haven't vetted our players or given them enough information about what it is that they're choosing to participate in, like it gets sticky, right? It gets sticky. And Matt, for you, precedent. I mean, that's a part of what you go back and the legacy of that is such a very big part of what you do. Like when you think of it as,
Yeah.
and by the way, also you were doing the Unka Bunka Unka Unka caveman thing. I was thinking of Ringo Starr caveman, where you're like, Kafka, Kafka. Y'all are old enough to get this reference. I can do this.
I know.
Sheet. Anyway,
Shit.
and
Matt,
then
retort.
and
I'm
then
sorry.
at some point, and there's some great comments. By the way, I just love, and as a fan watching you two the last few weeks, you know, jazz, game mastery is jazz. Absolutely. I don't know if there's a musical form that is more applicable. Um, Mastery of the system. I mean, that means a lot of different things. I mean, if we think about like the Bruce Lee 10,000 hours to master something, and I doubt very few game masters have 10,000 hours. We probably do, right? I mean, 1984 here, and a lot of different people, but a lot of people
Nah.
that have come into the hobby in the last years, they don't have 10,000 hours. So they're not masters yet, but can they understand the framework? Can they understand the game? And this is why I found the topic that you brought up for this tonight, Matt. Um, Game mastery is design and all of these interlocking things and how the role is. But yeah, so when you hear Gary talk about informing and precedent and such, what switch does that flick in your brain?
Well, I need to clarify. So the baptism of naming is think of the baptism of a child. I name you Lord Mattias, and from here on out. So it's at the beginning, right? So Gary, you're right now thinking about some kind of West Marches esque game for the Discord server. So you have to go through this process of like what is going to work, what isn't going to work, and in your case, I would argue rules as written is probably the best way to go about it until there's a problem that comes up later on. But at the moment of baptism of the game, you're saying, guys, this is
Bro, is
He
that
just
me or
made
you?
the
time
game,
stop.
and this is how we're doing it.
Yeah, Matt, you froze up for like a half second. Your arms went up in the
It
air.
was great.
You made your point, and then you came back.
And he froze. It was
All
great.
right. Well,
Okay.
anyway, that's the game. Is
Well, and
once you baptize, like we're day
right, and
one,
then
session zero, whatever you want to call it, but that's the game. And so if you're going to include homebrew, and I want to be clear, I was on a Legion of Mist stream a little while back about rules as written, house rules, and homebrew, and I kind of define them as rules as written is about learning the intent of the game designer's intent. House rules are not about your personal preferences. House rules are about what the table needs to facilitate a good time. So, like I said, maybe you're sitting at a table with a bunch of people who hate encumbrance, right? I love encumbrance, but let's just say hypothetically they hate encumbrance. Well, you know what? It might be good for the table, so get rid of it. I mean, no one's stopping you. I wouldn't want to do that, but I'm just saying, right? And then homebrew is that's the game master having fun with the world, and that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the baptism. Like, this is what the kind of game I'm going to run. These are the kind of homebrew things including. For example, my Lamentations of Elemental Evil game was predominantly like 95% rules as written, but I had been meditating leading up to that. One of the problems I saw with the OSR and the newbies, they get all these toys, feats and multi-classing and magic and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, hey, you want to play OSE? Yeah, I'm going to play a fighter. Do I get a second wind? You get a short sword. So how do you bridge that gap? So I wrote a blog post about it a couple of years ago, and I think so to bridge that gap, I came up with an idea, simple thing I called backgrounds, where you picked your fighter, and then there was these 8 choices, and that background gave you this one little thing to kind of define you, to make Joe Fighter different from Bob Fighter, but it didn't break the game, because Lamentations is very clear about niche protections. Fighters fight, specialists do the specializing, so on and so forth. But it did allow you to kind of tap into some of these other classes a little bit. But that was like my homebrew to make this world that I was going to create for my players, have a little more teeth versus as opposed to just something in your mind. There's like a rule where the rubber meets the road kind of thing, where the real and the unreal kind of connect, right? And that's what I mean by the baptism. And this is like why I sort of feel like this baptism theory kind of meets that tension. It's not relativism. It looks like relativism because at the moment it's very arbitrary from the outsider looking in, but the moment you baptize, it's necessary. It's the game. It's objective.
Oh, you've given it power, right? I mean, at that point, it now has power and agency in the game. It's been breathed life into it. Um, Maddie, can I
well,
ask you a
hold on
question?
real
Because I'm
quick.
fast. Oh, sorry. Go
Hold
ahead.
on real quick, Ryan. One of the things I do want to mention is that as I'm talking about this rules is written and everything else, and I'm organizing this campaign, there are adjustments to the rules already made. I'm not like against making your game what you need to make it, right? But as I'm going through and making notes, like I was saying, the different options, right? And then, I've read some rules recently that I think would really help to sort of like fighters being boring. You know what I mean? We talk about the bells. So like I'm really leaning hard into giving fighters the what is it? It's like a damage bonus and a really souped up version of cleave that you find in axe. You know what I mean? Just little things. I'm thinking of taking out spells like knock and find trap. You know what I mean? To make so that thieves are, a little more useful. I'm using the D6, probably going to use the D6 thief skills from Carcass Crawler #1. So it's not that I'm against, I just think that you need to have all of that in order. And especially if you want to use these house rules or these optional rules that a lot of games present, I think before character creation, you need to have a good outline of it, be able to share it with your players, you know, and really that's it. And I think if you do that at the beginning, you're not gonna have to do the rule zero or rule of cool or whatever. And I know a lot of people argue for these things, but I can't. I just can't. I think there might be games, there are games that center around like Fate is one of those games that's kind of like the whole game, craves the rule of cool, right? But I think when we're talking about like OSR games and things like that, they came from a very a simulationist, a war game simulationist background. Those rules that we're building our games on come from the simulationist background. So I think you need to have a pretty good reason to change them. I think you need to be careful how much you add to them and how much you take away. I think you can tune them. Obviously, it's a great foundation. Just have it ready before, if at all possible, have it ready before character creation.
Well, certainly. I'm sorry, Brian. I know you have a question, but I really want to address this point.
No, rock on.
We're just like
We
we should probably stay in separate states, Gary.
I think we're aggressively agreeing, to tell you the truth.
No,
I don't think we disagree that much.
Yeah, this is another thing though, because I hear that come up, like, oh, you might ruin your game with the wrong rule. Well, like Griff, like just sort of like said in his last video, it was, yeah, and if it doesn't work, just change it. And then it dawned on me, all these talking heads online are talking from like these friggin' ivory towers. That's why I like punk rock, folks. These ivory towers where they have like these, just like, oh, I think this, and I came up with this logical proof. And I'm like, well, have you been in the trenches to test that out? And and then I think about a vast majority. A lot of us online in this like kind of pseudo community where we kind of know each other. Like I see Judd. Hey, Judd, thanks for showing up, buddy. I saw Ultra. Looks like the informal games here are awesome. Brian, the other Brian, thanks for being here. Like we game with these guys, but like there's a different sort of vibe and a different sort of like set of rules that kind of govern those relationships, right? But we are not the actual hobby. We're just sort of a subsect. The real hobby is all these other guys who may know who this podcaster is, who bought the game, go home with their friends, and that's their gaming group. They're your friends. You're not committing a sin if you're like, oh, hey, you remember that house rule I came up with? Yeah, it's not working out, dude. Let's change it. Okay. Like, you didn't commit a sin. No sin was committed.
Yeah, true. But I think that's something to be avoided, right?
Why?
Like a tourniquet will stop the bleeding. You know what I mean?
This is an elf game. It's not life or death.
I get it.
You're just having fun.
I get it.
You're just kicking the ball around.
Look, and also let's remember the context from which we're talking, okay? If you're talking about running one party, like on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, you're friends with those guys, and it is a simple sit-down game, and they're okay with it, then fine, right? I mean, Matt, if you change something, I would trust that you're not just doing things willy-nilly because, oh, let's have fun being a DM, right? You would be doing it for a purpose.
Oh, yeah. But like at what you just said, though, and this is where I'm kind of pushing I'm trying to get at how I define game master. You just listed some properties of a potential game that might not exist in a different set of circumstances. A game master is someone who takes more into account than just what Gary Gygax wrote in the first edition or what James Radji wrote in LOTFP. They're taking into consideration, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but in my opinion, they're taking into consideration how many players do I have? Who are they? when are we going to play? How long are we going to play at a session? How often? Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? There's all this stuff that all informs the game. Like, I'm not going to use one-to-one time if I get together with someone once a month. That'd be a waste. That would be a waste of one-to-one time. And it would be kind of boring, I think. Yeah, I think it would just be all downtime. It would just not be fun. But maybe if I had a different set of players who were actually into that sort of thing, maybe I would try it. You see what I'm saying? So the moment you figure out all that stuff, there's the game. And so there's no issue. There's no tension between rules as written and this like rule zero animosity people have. You've figured this stuff out. This is what you're doing. And yes, you should be a little flexible if something's not working. But, that's just humility. But I think and for the record, I think rule of cool has been abused in the past 5 years. Like before, it was really just, I rolled the hit, I did 8 points of damage with my short or my long sword, and you just describe it so it looks cool. You know what I mean? That's to me how I've always understood the rule of cool. It's when people, and I've had DMs like this, and they were terrible, would in the middle of a game session, in the middle of a combat, decide this one rule is not going to apply because this other thing would be cooler. That's not what I'm talking about at all. So
No, but I think that's how people are taking it, right? Like I think when you, man, Brian, I'm sorry, you should talk. I'm just saying that's how people are taking it. I think right now, we saw a lot of growth. I don't know. Should we say we saw a lot of growth in role playing games, or should we say we saw a lot of growth in Dungeons and Dragons during the pandemic and post pandemic? Either way, I think a lot of the new folks. Let me put it this way: I think there are people making fucking GM advice videos that have been in the hobby not even as long as my youngest kid, right? There are people who started their channel when they were usually they start yeah, anyway, they don't have enough experience, and when they explain rule zero or rule of cool or whatever it is that might be, they're doing it from the viewpoint of somebody who once started playing a superhero game with 5e, right? And I think it's that one, nobody can define it, and anytime you try to define it, I think it's misunderstood.
Well, that's not now we're getting to the meat. Like you just hit it. You hit the nail right on the head, Gary, which is when we're trying to define these concepts, whether you're a game master, a facilitator, administrator, dungeon master, judge, all the things. I have like 10 of the terms, and I've been ticking them off as you guys been naming off because it was just my own curiosity. But one person's definition is not another person's definition whenever they're playing it of what rule is rule of cool embellishment. It can be. Is rule of cool some sort of adjudication of a like Wormwood has this die that just came out on Kickstarter. It's the die that allows for a high variance is what they call it. But basically it has a bunch of extra ones and has a bunch of extra 20s. And this die in this Kickstarter that I'm getting for free for the set that I bought my wife because she is the original Dice Goblin, it's meant to be used to create or manufacture an artificial moment. Like you use that die to get a big swing. When I saw it and of course they're giving it away because no respectable GM is going to say, "Oh, I want a high variance die." But then I thought about it for a second. I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does high variance mean? And is there a time? Yes, it can be. Should it be agreed upon? Should there be some forewarning? Most likely so, because someone's going to get left out. The average table is 5 players and a GM. And when that rule of cool or that little bit of embellishment lands with someone, it's not going to land with someone else. So we have to be very, I don't want to say tactical, but we got to be careful that we're not just going willy nilly because sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the moment. Matt, the question I had for you earlier, and it's been staying in the back of my mind because you've done such a tremendous job watching the evolution of you from 5 years ago to facilitating this Lamentations game. And it's a real simple concept, but it's one that's often argued many times between OSR and modern. Like I think about encumbrance, and maybe when you first started that campaign and you started having kind of an idea of what it was going to look like, because you're talking a mega dungeon, uh, the most mythical mega dungeon next to maybe like anyway, that one, the other big one.
Yeah.
Did you
Yep.
find that you wound up having to do adjustments? Did you find that the work you put into it didn't pay off? Did you find hand waving? Like it's such a boring thing, but sometimes it's a very necessary element. And is the line between reality, verisimilitude, that word gets thrown around a lot. Like, was the juice worth the squeeze? 60, 70 sessions in now with something like that concept.
Yeah, we're actually we just did the 88th session last night.
Oh man.
Uh, um, no, it was because, well, number one, Lamentations of the Flame Princess is the superior encumbrance system when compared to OSE. It's a slot based system. That was for you, Gary. The so it's easier for the players to just sort of manage. I did put a lot of trust in my players. Very rarely did I call I mean, I think in the earlier sessions in between, I'd be like, let me see your character sheet. But after a while, I was like, I trust you at this point. The only time I've gotten a little hand wavy, and it's really not, I wouldn't call it hand wavy, it's just me kind of being loose. It's just tracking time in the dungeon because they're having like, I don't mind a little metagame if they're all like having a powwow to try to figure out what to do next, and they're trying to solve a puzzle or whatever, or figure out their next step, plan of action. But I'll sit there, I'll be like, well, it's like they're having a conversation. Yeah, 10 minutes have gone by, and I'll just sit there. All right, another 10 minutes have gone by. You know what I mean? But that's as loose as I've gotten with that. I've tried very hard to stay, because that was the point of the game. When I baptized that game, I was like, this is LOTFB. Our rules is written with the exception of this one background thing. Well, to be fair, as the game progressed, in response to player actions, I actually started developing character classes for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Like the village of Nulb, they decided to create some sort of what do you call it? Not black ops, false flag operation. They encountered a lizard man community like out in the swamps, like maybe like 5 miles out. So they promised the lizard men bodies to eat if the lizard men pretended to attack Nulb, so they would fight off the lizard men and become the heroes. So they would get the political power to push out the bandits who resided there. And it worked like a charm. So I'm like, well, there's lizard men character classes now. And I made a lizard men character class that a lot of my players love.
So you designed.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And we also had like a goblin character class because I made goblins like Fae. But so there was some of that after the fact. But generally, I mean, it was rules as written, and they would like come up and one guy, he stopped playing about a year ago, but he was like very well versed in military history. He's like, we have the money, we're going to buy 12 arquebuses, we're going to create a ribald, which is like this big gun, our piece of artillery, and they hitched it to their battle wagon that they also built, and the medical wagon that they also built, and they trumped around my, and that there's no rules for that, and that's where you have to do the ruling over rules bit. And actually, that's when I started borrowing a few things from the rules cyclopedia to help give me a guide, but for the most part, I really didn't hand wave. I haven't been.
But you did some design.
A little bit, yeah.
So they're kind of on topic, I guess, a little bit. You're a game master. So did you find that you were having to modify as you went a little bit, season the taste, a little salt and pepper, maybe with the concept of encumbrance, classes, all the things, creating scenarios? By the way, a House of Nyx, like I'm watching the chat. This is so cool to be live and be in this little game here. But
it's fun.
Creating the conflict. So now we start thinking, okay, encumbrance. Here's a system you've agreed upon, rules is written, so forth. You evolve, find something that hits the pulse of what your table's doing, that fits the theme as it continues to grow by session 25 or session 43 and so forth. So my brain and where I sometimes go when I see some of this, and I try to come up with what's fresh, what's new, is right where House and Nix, you are right in the zip code, creating conflict so that your players can respond. We prep situations, not plots. Like I get how would I create a conflict around encumbrance and like the lizard man and all that, like that's something, there's some great meat on the bone there whenever you're starting to create situations that now link into what you were designing. So now you have this like perfect merge of both, the house rules or the table rules, but now it's got grit because now the players have to respond to it. They have to act upon it. There's consequences to it. At its base, encumbrance consequences are I have to drop this to pick this up.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
I actually.
at its best, it is I have to potentially sacrifice this one town that's never going to be able to provide for the greater community so that this other might flourish. And now we're talking micro to macro. So it's fascinating stuff in terms of game master designer, game master referee adjudicator, game master playing jazz.
Well, I don't think. Well, first off, if you're putting together your game like you're talking about, there's some. I don't know. We can argue about whether that's designing or not.
I think
You
it
got
is.
word for a reason.
But I think some of these things come about. I think the best house rules or rule zero or whatever, the only way is, I mean, like if there's a consistent problem, that's more of just a rule change that you do in between games. I don't know, man. It's like I say, it's hard. We talk about encumbrance, and like right now in my mind, encumbrance is just fucking necessary.
I agree with
You
you.
must have encumbrance. You must keep track.
I
of food.
agree with you
You know what
there.
I mean?
I
It's
agree
just
with
the
you.
way it is. And I know that people hand wave encumbrance. I know
Yeah.
most people hand wave encumbrance, right? And it doesn't bother me that. I mean, it kind of does
Why
bother
do
me
we
that
do
they
it?
do it
Why do
right
we
now.
do
If
it?
I'm being really honest, it kind of does
hand wave
bother me.
encumbrance?
What's that? Because our players bitch about it.
Because it's not about encumbrance, right? Encumbrance right now is what we're talking about,
No,
but it could be any element of the
but
game.
it is. But see, see. This is what I'm talking about. Here we go. This has been a long time coming, man. This is built up and built up and built up to where like we look. Though it is a game, and games have fucking rules. Follow those rules, and if something needs to change at your table, that's fine. But it needs to be it can't be wishy-washy. It can't be because, oh, wouldn't it be cool if he just knocked that guy off the bridge for no good reason or whatever. It just you know we used to talk or game people a couple years ago. All these games talked about cinematic experiences and this and that, and I think that was the sign that we had fucking lost it, and we all bought into it, and we were all looking for those big exciting moments, and we lost track of the fact that these are games with mechanics. You roll the dice, you move the pieces. If there's a story, it emerges from the play of that game, right? Like at its heart, this is a simulation where you're crawling through dungeons and you're exploring wilderness, and occasionally there is a mission with some lore. You know what I mean? Story is really in a game like this is history and lore. That's your story. If you have some big role playing scene, it's because you got that one fucking guy at your table that wants to role play. You know what I mean? And there's opportunity for that. That's fine. But at its heart, it is a game that works on there is a list of procedures. This is how you play the game in a dungeon. This is how you play a game in the wilderness. This is how you play here. These are the rules to accomplish these tasks. If the rules don't cover that, that's when you really become the referee and you start arbitrating those things and trying to figure it out. You can, and like I say, you can change, like if you want to add a character class or you want to take things out, that needs, the vast majority of that needs to be done before the game. I'm really at a point where I I don't have a lot of patience for things being changed like
That
midstream. Yeah, I just don't. And I don't know. I don't know what changed in me, but the whole rule of, you know what dawned on me? What dawned on me, I was playing the Star Wars, the Fantasy Flight Star Wars, right? And everybody sees that as this fluffy game, and you just get to make the story go wherever because you're using the narrative dice on that. But that is not true. It's all
that's true.
mechanical.
Yeah,
It is.
that's
It's
true.
all
Yep.
mechanical. Like, it's not like you get to read the dice and say, "Oh, I blew up his fucking ship." No, 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 no. The mechanics, the numbers come first, and then there's a narration that grows out of that, sort of this emerging narration, right?
But the same thing
Don't
happens
change
though in
them.
the OSR. And I'll explain that in 1 second. I want to do a quick digression. You are where I was when we first met. I just want to point that out. I just need to bring this up. There was that infamous podcast where we tried to create Ninja Turtles taking on Hans Gruber and Nakatomi Tower. Gary and I were practically at each other's throats by the end because I wanted
I
to
was an
map.
instigator. It was my fault. I was instigating both of them.
I wanted to map every level of Nakatomi
Yeah.
Tower because who knows what the players are going to do, and I still would do that, by the way. But you
Right,
are at
right.
where I was a while back, and I'd say that not to say that you have to grow. No, I just think I've changed, and I think you've changed. We've grown
Well,
playing these games, and and to dovetail the Trumpian swerve.
yeah.
It goes to the Matt. I think it was Matt Finch wrote like this OSR primer years ago, and there's this thing called the Ming vase. So you have this Ming vase in a battle with like orcs, and it's just sitting there. It's like, why hasn't it gotten knocked over? So you're talking about going to your little example of someone getting tossed off a bridge. You're playing OSE, and I'm that guy who will try to avoid anyway, saying I swing to hit, I rolled a 15. I will be saying things like, all right, I'm going to try to parry and try to position him so I can drop kick him off the bridge. I rolled a 15. What happens, Gary? How are you going to adjudicate that? Or did I just swing my sword with that roll of 15? I don't think so.
If there's not, that's what your job. If you are, but that's the thing is, there is a, what do you? I would argue that I would find a rule that could do that. I don't know. I'm distracted. Somebody here. Sorry, I was distracted reading the thing. Somebody said that role playing comes first and then the die roll, right? I don't know, man. Like, you're at the dungeon. What are you like? What is the, if you're talking, when I say things like role playing and I'm getting all exasperated, I'm talking about, I want to go talk to the princess and have a scene where I use a voice and da 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 da, right? If you're talking about, I think right now with a lot of games, it's you're at the tavern, we want to go to the dungeon. Okay, it's going to take you an hour to get to the dungeon. You have 7 hours before this, and we're going to keep track of time. And I think the character acting, I think the role playing, emerges as the game happens. And I think the game is the mechanics and all of that. So the chicken or egg, role playing or mechanics, I forget who said that. I don't remember who it was. I don't think it's not role playing first. It's game first. It is a game. We're playing a game.
Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry.
You've seen Wrath of Khan, One of us is Ricardo Montalban, the other one is Bill Shatner. I'll leave it up to the viewers. We will chase each other around the moons of perdition.
You brought up that Teenage Mutant Ninja. Okay, and you brought up our differences in planning and how we would do it. But I also think that would depend on what game.
I agree, but that's part of the baptism. Like,
right?
All the things a game master has to think about.
Absolutely, yeah. Sure. And I probably am closer to where you were back then. Absolutely. But I think a lot of that is because I bought into the promise of more than one game that was going to promise big, dramatic, cinematic action and yada, yada, yada. Maybe one or two. And they don't ever really pay off, in the end. I ran, whew, I don't know. I don't know how many sessions. Under 20, over 10 sessions of Everyday Heroes. And Brian was there for all of them. And I have to tell you, I would have, by the end of it, I just the system, I don't know, the system itself and the way it was built, I was like, these numbers don't accomplish the things that they said this game would do, right? These mechanics don't do that. And I just kind of left flat. So these things do matter. They are the game, and we need to be careful. You can't just go changing things willy nilly because it might be cool. And if you want to put something cool in your game,
I
do
agree.
it at the beginning. That's all I'm saying. I'm out.
After that Everyday Hero,
That agreed with me. I fucking win.
It was in between a couple of my campaigns that had finished, but I did it was a mashup of Escape from New York and Fallout in Houston. Had them all coming out from underneath the Astrodome. The Astrodome was a vault, and so forth, and going with. You look at a system like that, and of course it aspires for this that such a tropey trap word, which is cinematic. It's cinematic is just such a fool's gold, as it were. And it's because we've grown up on so much of this James Cameron-esque media that we think we have to have these bombastic scenes. When you go into it and you're die hard, try hard. I mean, we hear try. It's try hard. It's absolute try hard gaming. It comes off very false, and redundant, because now you're chasing the same. It's the reason why Missing in Action 4 did not do as well as Missing in Action 1. You've seen it, you've done it before. So role playing, and I think Griff, really hit the nail on the head last week. It's about the immersion. What are you doing? Not what are you saying? Not what sort of tether are you trying to pull in the system to activate said sequence? Just what do you want to do? And that's the most important dialogue that takes place at the table. It means different things to different people. And as we get a better sense for our players, and Gary, you went through that doing a virtual game with some different players, like what do you do? You're going to get 3 different answers to that question that are going to tug on different strings, that are not always connected to the game system. They're not always connected to the plot you prepped. They are going to be tertiary as a complement. So it's and this is where that whole
That's why I allow my parties to split up a lot. Like I don't run if I'm running that one party game, where
toddlers all over the room, throwing blocks, making logs.
I want to do this. I want to do that. All right, cool. Y'all can all go do that. You don't have to stay together. Go. Here we go. But yeah, I don't know. It's I think we're talking about Rule Zero and all of these things from this standpoint of we really know, and I'm talking about it from a sort of a BX standpoint, old school essentials, and I think we've played that system for so long that we really understand that if we twist this knob is going to tighten up. You know what I mean? I think we kind of have a really good understanding of that. But I think the way that term is thrown around now, and with all the internet people, I think it's the way I hear people talk about it. I want it to be killed. I want Rule Zero. I want Rule of Cool to be completely driven.
Well, there's a dynamic. It's not just the rules, right? And it's not just the rulings. They both have a place. And it's not just choices either, because choices, you can go down this stupid spiral, and we've all seen it in games, whether live or our own, where it's just like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? There has to be tension. As long as tension is assigned, whether it's a rule, a ruling, a role play or choice or whatever, tension is the key. And if we find that, whether it's Vampire the Masquerade, whether it's car wars or what, you find that tension. Well, now you're hooked into something that's going to draw and keep us engaged, game masters and players alike. But it's tricky. Like, do you have to have mastery of the system? No.
Yes, because that's what should drive
Well,
the
we think
tension.
that, Gary, but you said it yourself. There are people that are putting forth all these expertise videos. They've been playing for less than 5-10 years. Okay, they certainly don't have the requisite 10,000 hours for mastery or something. But I guarantee you, some of those people are still bringing valid ideas and concepts to the table that are very, very different. We just have to still be students of technique. And if we're still looking at ways to connect that, if you're only playing rules,
No.
you're chasing the Trojan of simulationism for simulationism's sake. That's not a role playing
No.
game for tabletop
I'm
play.
not. I'm absolutely not. I'm absolutely not. And first off, when you say, they may have something good to offer, sure, maybe every once in a while they have something good to offer, but in between they're going to put out 4 to 6 videos that are just dumb, and it's going to hurt. It's like, you know, it, they're not just going to offer advice that most of the time it doesn't matter. A lot of this shit is things that, just kind of happen in the game anyway, but they might put out something that is just kind of harmful,
We can diagnose that,
to the
right?
game, I
It's
don't
no
mean
different than
like push that. But what I'm saying is, and no, they're doing more damage than any good idea they may have stumbled upon. They're doing far more damage if you want to talk about like damage to the hobby or what have you. And how many videos do you see where no matter what they're talking about, in the middle of it, and don't forget, there's always rule of cool. There's
Yeah,
always rule zero.
I'd like to
You know what I
make a
mean?
distinction
And
between rule zero and rule of cool. Like again, yeah.
yeah, they're different
Well,
things, but I
I
hate them
think rule
both.
zero properly understood is just the rulings over rules concept of the OSR. It's when it gets expanded that it bleeds into this rule of cool bit, and I'm completely with you. Like, I don't like rule of cool. If you're going to do any kind of rule of cool type of thing, that happens before the baptism when you're coming up with your homebrew for like, I'm going to run a game in a mythical Southeast Asian setting, so I'm going to put in ninjas and I'm going to do this special thing, this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
You print out your campaign document, you give it to everybody so everyone knows what's going on. Boom, the game runs. But once that goes, and that's why we have to go back to naming and necessity. The moment it's baptized, everything is necessary, and it cannot be arbitrary after that point. So,
right. No, I mostly agree with you. I just, it's hard to talk about rule zero because there's no real definition for it. So we're talking about this sort of nebulous subject, and at the moment, my overall feeling on rule zero is fairly negative. And I think it's been earned. Like I said before, I think there are a lot of games, especially there are some games I've played that seem to be minimal mechanics wrapped around rule zero.
Mark Borg is like that.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why I don't like it.
I love the art though.
I don't like it, but it's just because it makes me want to puke.
Vastly different opinions all around. Okay.
Yes.
I'm normally not a sucker for art, by the way.
So
usually I'm always trying to look at what's the grit, but for some reason I was enraptured with the art in that book.
I feel like it was trying real hard to be edgy, look like a 90s zine, and it didn't.
Morkborg is to Winger,
you know what I mean?
As Lamentations is to the black metal scene of the late 90s.
And yeah. And also a thing about that is that even if there's a decent system under there, like I can't use that book. That book is so like non-functional, right? As a product or like at the rule table, it's a fucking mess, dude. Every time I turn a page, I'm blinded by some new fucking day glow, whatever. I'm just like, I hate it. I don't care what the rules are. I hate it. So I know, right?
So I'm gonna touch back on rule of
Brian,
cool
real quick. No. You're
no,
not
no,
easy
No,
on
no,
this
no. This
motherfucker.
is how he
We
does his
try.
thing, and that's
Hold
why I
on.
love it. Because like,
I was gonna. I got a
oh,
question for
okay.
Brian.
All right, sure.
For Brian. We're talking about this. How would your players that pony up cash, right, for you to run these games? And I'm not talking about a house rule, right? I'm not talking about in between sessions you guys talk about something. And I'm not talking being an arbiter where you're having to sort of decipher what the rules mean or, oh, this is a murky place. I'll make my best decision. I mean, you come up with an idea in the moment. And it's new. It's new. You've never tested it. You haven't run it by anybody. And it's new enough that it's striking. You know what I mean? You do something. How do your players who obviously enjoy, they enjoy your game and they're willing to invest in your time for that game, what are they going to do when you start fucking with your game world's physics or whatever, when you start using
I have an example.
rule
It
zero?
wasn't necessarily game physics or in-game world, but it utilized the concept of downtime and difficulties involved with accomplishing that, so that we still had what was happening out of the game that these characters were going through. So having run Ravenloft for 15 years, it's always going to be part of my DNA. But I'm running a Greyhawk game, but I have a Terraroka deck. So what does Brian do in his crazy brain? I start assigning every single Terraroka card to a particular class: martial, spiritual, magical, and social. I start assigning all of the different cards certain ranks in the DCs. And so what we were doing was almost like an evolutionary form of downtime resolution, where the DCs and the narration, it was even about where the card was flipped. It was very engrossing for probably about 5 sessions. My players, they were like, wow, this is super cool. And there was a lot of really innovative thought that came into what the characters were doing that gave us a lot of fuel. The mistake I made was I stayed in that part of the pool too long, and it lost its luster. It served a purpose, and I probably would have been much better off just letting that ride intermittently, not every session, but maybe just like once every 5 to 8 sessions, just as a prompt. And if I could go back over that 5-year campaign, I would go back and do it more intermittently because it had that certain luster. It allowed all of us to have that sense of emergent resolution. None of us knew where it was going to go, but we sure as hell were going to do rulings, not rules, rulings off of what we saw off those cards and the die results together. And it gave us a lot of good plot lines. But yeah, at the time, my players were very open to it, paid players alike,
But
and also people that were brand new to the game, because it's a form of interface.
that's not something you did in the middle of a
Oh,
game where something seemed cool to you. Like homebrew house rules, whatever. That's you can kind of talk to your players through that.
yeah, I
This is
tried to
whatever.
never do anything
But
mid game that's an evolution of something.
rule
Now, I
zero.
really I chafe at that. It feels false. It feels,
Yeah.
hey, let's put the circus on right here. But wait a minute, we got to move all the equipment. We got to move the animals. That's not. It's players are very they're very intuitive. They know when you're doing that, and so if you start pulling the wool around over their eyes, and so, oh, now I'm gonna try that. No, I don't know. No, I can't do it. I'd rather keep expediting using what the framework already is. They have trust in that.
Absolutely.
To kind of follow
I
up
agree.
on that, Brian, because you got this paid gig. You're running Shadow Dark, is that correct?
That's not my paid gig. My
Oh,
guys are paying me to run 5e24 to take away
oh,
my time of running. Yeah, to take
Oh
away from
oh!
shit! Let's
to take
go.
away from my time of running Shadow Dark.
Hour 2,
because they
baby.
know I would be running Shadow Dark at my game store. 'Cause I've been doing Shadow. I'm the one guy that promotes Shadow Dark at my game store here in Houston. Actually, it's in Katy. But so I the problem in this, it's not a heartbreaker system. I don't believe it's a heartbreaker. It's just not in retail. It needs a retail presence. It needs a bricks and mortar. It's
Yeah.
the one thing that Kelsey's really missing. So I take on that role of really running and doing. I did seminars on the system for people that never played role-playing games and showing them a little bit what, and they come in thinking D&D anyway. Squirrel. But my paid game was my guys that are like, we really love how you run 5e because it's not 5e as, so they pay me to run 5e24, the new iteration, and that takes away from my Shadow Dark. But I find ways.
Are you running 2024 as written?
It's like, if we give you $200, will you take us out in the parking lot and kick our asses for an hour and a half, please?
Are you running
Sorry.
2024 rules as written?
Pretty darn close. I did Shadow Dark it. I made light is not a cantrip. I Kelsey did a little bit to make but my players agreed to it beforehand
Okay.
because they knew what I was. I said, hey, trade out Dark Vision. If you want to get not a feat, because feats are much more powerful now in 5e24 than what they were before. But trade out Dark Vision for other things. Proficiencies and such like that. Just anything to kind of give it a little bit more. Because I'm doing this whole Mad Max meets Reign of Fire meets The Walking Dead. I'm doing it in Bone March. And Bone March just felt right. There's a lot on the outskirts in the interior of Bone March that's very narratively provocative, but also systemically, it gives me a chance to do some stuff different from Kaeland and the Yeomanry and all the traditional areas and such. But yeah, that's my paid game. My guys, Godfather 3, just when I thought I was out, dude. I had canceled. I was canceled off of WotC for like almost a year. I told my guys I'm so done with this.
Yeah.
And just when I thought I was out, my guys were, hey, look, we really would like to give this a shot. They tried. They tried some of my other games I tried to run, but
Yeah.
there's just so they're a good group. We don't let 5e get in the way of our fun.
Well, that's cool. Real quick, actually, I want to highlight Chubby Funster here. I just saw him on Tenkar's live stream just about an hour or so ago. This guy's been writing a lot of Shadow Dark supplements that are actually really neat. He's got handbooks and stuff, extra classes, but he's also been doing setting material, which is what I'm interested in. And he's got one influenced or inspired by Skyrim, another one by inspired by Dark Sun. Go to Drive Through RPG, Brian, and check it out. I know
Shadow Sun. Yeah.
Oh, you're familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
By the way, Shadow Dark is not the gateway. Shadow Dark is the destination. That is where I want to eventually bring. It's to put to. I'm not going to throw out the cred, but I will a little bit. My birthday gift was a hand drawn by Lucas Corte, the artist. You guys both saw it. It was hand drawn Lucas Corte doing his interpretation of the back cover of A2, Secret of the Slaver's Stockade. There's a cloaker on it, the very first monster to ever kill me in a game in 1983. Hence cloaker. I'm eternally scarred. And so it's the Shadow Dark version. If you're familiar with that Shadow Dark art, Lucas Corte doing a cloaker. Shadow Dark is my end game ultimately. So it's just
what is it you think? Like, why do you think your players for the paid game, where you're running D&D 24, why is it you think they want to go to that as opposed to?
We talked about it. We talked about
Shadow
it because there was a brief moment where I thought I had the window of opportunity to get them. It's purely in what they see as control of options. They love the modularity. And I can't dispute that. Even freaking the builder Bob Goot. He was like,
Oh yeah.
it's like they ask him, well, what game would you play? a lot of those interviews are saying, well, I'd probably play 5e. Yeah, because it's that sense of control. The reality is, though, is that whenever you tell someone, well, what do you want to do? And they're going through what their actions are on their sheet, or they have to have some sort of mind map or flow chart to figure out what to. Whenever the reality is that when I ran a Shadow Dart game for my buddy and his two kids, she's like, yeah, I'm gonna throw the grappling hook up to the top of the platform. I'm gonna pull it down so that they'll all fall. Yeah, there's no mechanic in 5e for that.
Yeah.
Shadow Dart, we just made it happen. And he was like,
Yeah.
dude, we got through like 15 encounters in 4 hours. I was like, yeah, man, we got flow, right? We got rhythm. So, yeah, my players, though,
But it doesn't have the
yeah,
bells
that's
and
just what it
whistles for
is,
the
right?
players.
They
Well,
just, it's the gadgets.
that's what goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's this real tension between like that OSR feel, that OSR gaming philosophy, and like the modern game, and what the modern gamers want. They want that game within a game, that I'm going to build this awesome character, especially when you have like, what's it, DM Beyond, D&D Beyond, or whatever it is. People would actually build their
Yeah.
character all the way up to 20th level, so they knew what they needed to do, as they gained in level, which I think is ridiculous.
It's deck
But
building.
yeah, it's deck building. Yes.
For 30
Yeah.
years
and
building their, Black
and
Lotus or whatever, which, by the way, I had that card. I played one game of Magic in 1993, my whole life. One game of Magic the Gathering. I had a Black Lotus card. I hated that game. I wanted to play Spellfire. I gave it to this pretty girl named Amanda, and now I understand that Black Lotus card is like worth like
a lot of money.
I guess so. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope Amanda. I hope she did something with my Black Lotus card from my one game. Huh.
I think I think the big difference, and I think you touched on a little bit earlier when you were saying, the most important sentence is, what do you want to do? And I think that in the old school games that have less feats and don't have skills, you just have like, some characters have certain class powers, right? Like thief skills or whatever the fuck, when you strip it down, the game is,
Yeah.
what do you want to do? But the more you add to it, the game becomes,
Yes.
what can I do? Right? And that's yeah.
Gary, my
that's
wife
what it
ran
is.
into that problem.
And there
My
should be a
wife, when
balance.
we got to about 8th level, bless her heart, filthy casual. She does not ever think about the game when we're not playing it. But when we got to about 7th, 8th level in 5th edition, it just got away from her. She loved when I was running basic fantasy role playing. The Gonerman, that was what she kind of grew up on. When my stepson, when I first got him in, I'm running Castle Amber. He's 10 years old at that time. Now he's 25. But running him on just those basic concepts, it keeps it imaginative. So you start thinking of alternative ways that don't just come down to rock, paper, scissors.
I would love to play Car Wars. I just see like that comment right there. I haven't played that.
I'd love to play Car Wars. I've never played. I played Auto Duel back in
I never played it.
I played Auto Duel. I think that was like Car Wars inspired. But yeah.
It was inspired, but not the same thing, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's got to be the new players, and I think, in a way, Brian, you're to blame for.
I'm gonna let you do that.
No, we are doing this because here's the thing: you're like Michael Jordan going to the Clippers, right? Like that would give you are a really good game master, and you go to the Clippers and you're going to make them look good. Clippers being 5e, right? And you being Jordan. So you are able with a group of players to make that game, which I guess every game you can do that, right? The right GM can make any game. Everybody can have fun, depending on what kind of fun you want to have. I guess I don't know. You're keeping it alive, and I think you should walk away.
You're not the boss
from all that money. No, I'm just kidding. I know I'm not the boss. I wish it was easier. I do wish it was easier to get players to agree to do different games. There was a time when I really enjoyed playing a lot of different games, over a short period of time, right? Let's try this on Saturday. Hey, let's try this. But man, it really seems to me like now more than ever, people are pretty dug in on what they want to play, and I assume that's just because of a time constraint, right? Who has time to play 4 and 5 games? I guess I don't know. So, do you enjoy the 2024 rules?
I think that there are improvements. I think that also it's becoming an old chassis, and it's already got some
Yeah,
stress fractures that are there. I mean, when you have day one errata,
we're not even a year in. How can it have
say
stress
again,
fractures? Like it just came out. It just came. That just came out. How can we have
from
stress
the things that
fractures
weren't
already?
corrected, and then
Isn't
the
it less
things
than?
that are it just. I don't want to go down the 5E spiral because I feel like you're just going to flay me over and over again. But what I will say,
I'm not gonna
what I
flay
will say is
you.
this. All right, when we're talking about the overall arching Lehman's hut of as designer, the game master. All right, am I designing for 5e24? No, I'm not. Am I facilitating it? No, I'm not. Am I judging it? Am I directing it? Am I narrating it? Am I storytelling it? Am I the keeper? Am I the referee? Am I the like all of these different terms? I'm not any of that. I'm a captain. That is what I am. I run games, yes, and I totally get the rulings, not rules, the authority of the G. I totally get it. I grew up. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying for me, running games for 40 years across about 150, 200 people maybe in my life, with a lot of 5 and 10 year campaigns. I just really have adopted a more go with the flow. Just have fun gaming, create just great situations. That's my juice. My draw is just creating complex choices with consequences. Think about how good that first season or two of The Walking Dead was because they had to make tough choices. That is what I bring in. So but whatever the system is, it's like I'm the captain. What are the captain's role on the ship? Sure, you got to know where you're going. Sure, you have to know how the sea works and which way the wind goes. You got to keep, the crew, in good spirits, but you also got to keep discipline. So I don't know. That's just kind of my take on it. I'm more the captain. I'm the
Judd,
DM,
sorry,
yeah, captain.
Matt. Can you highlight Judd's last statement?
Not a cruise director, God.
He is not a
No,
cruise director
this isn't the
on
love
FOMO. Thank
bus.
you. Um, I wanna tell our friends who have been watching us for a little while something about my really good friend Brian, and I do love Brian. I do. I love him like that cousin you see twice a year and you just put in a headlock. I do.
You know
We
I'm a brown belt. You ain't gonna
one
put me in
time
no.
me and
No.
Matt, yeah, Brian is probably more sensitive to his players than any any other game master referee. Hang on, I gotta put my dog out. Sorry, I was giving you a compliment, but the universe is like, stop, Gary, put your dog out. Stop being nice to him. I'll be right back. Brian really does consider his players um more so than I think most people are able to, and sometimes much more than we should, but that is my opinion because I'm not a very sensitive man. Go ahead.
To bounce off of that, actually, going again, referencing that infamous Nakatomi Tower adventure we were talking about. I was at the time, and I still kind of consider myself pretty macro. I look at the world. I want to be like the world builder. I want to make my hex map, have all my dungeons, and then just sort of like press play and let my players go. And that's how my Lamentations game runs. Once I did all that work, I just hit play. I review notes and that's it. There's like almost zero prep. And then you kind of zoom in a little bit. At least it's back in the day. Gary sounds like he's evolved a little bit, but you'd zoom in, and Gary's focus was always like the scene. Like he would always talk about setting up the scene. That's why you don't need to map every single level of Nakatomi Tower. But when we were talking about that, there was a significant part of that session where Brian, you were like well, what are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles motivations? Like, why are we there? Like, what's going on there? And I'm we didn't have video because it was a podcast, and I'm doing this.
Well, like, so let's take the turtle. Four turtles. Why was I asking that?
Fuck. We need to try this again and see how we should do this like every 5 years. We should play Nakatomi Tower.
Yeah.
What did you call it? You call it Turtle Hard?
Just so we can keep
it.
I don't remember what. I think it might have been Turtle Hard. Yeah.
I don't remember.
But why do you think I asked that? Why do you think I asked that in relation to the to these four turtles? These four turtles.
I understand where you're coming from, Brian, because we were talking to Rob Alderman a few weeks ago, and I was explaining to him that one of the reasons I don't really, mega dungeons or just the dungeon idea in general is kind of, I want a justification for it, right? Like I've played too many games where you're just at the dungeon and it's these monsters here, these monsters there. You know what I mean? And I use the word motivation. Like, I said, I don't need like a role-playing scene, but why are the characters here? What are we looking for? You know what I mean? That's about as deep as I go on motivation right now. I say all this, but we haven't had a session of the row in about 3 weeks. And everything that I'm saying right now is not altogether true. Well, like with the rules, use rules and all that, but it's the row is kind of I didn't make it locate. Man, I messed up.
Back to the turtles. Can I just jump on the turtles?
Instead of making a game location,
I want to leap to the defense of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. The reason why I was asking that is because all four of those turtles, they have their personalities, their identities.
Right.
And what are their motivations? For me, as a captain or a game master or whatever the hell you want to call it, whatever it is, what I'm trying to look at is what can I create that's a situation or tension that will be relative. If I can connect the character and the player to that tension of a situation or a challenge in whatever the sandbox is, boy, that's for me. That's where I just see just a lot of magic, and it's fun. And then when we get to the dice, the resolution of that, man, it's game on. You don't have to rule it cool. It's already been made cool by the fact that it now it relates. There is skin in the game, as it were. So,
yeah. I don't know. I'm getting more and more to the idea that this idea of a prepackaged story is detrimental.
Oh, I totally agree.
But it's just the headspace I'm in right now. I'll change. I might change my mind. I did a thing.
Prepackaged stories have a place,
and I don't think it's the worst thing.
They have a place. Prepackaged stories and adventures have a place. They are for the novice, not game master, not dungeon master, the novice facilitator. Like, they need that. They need some training wheels. They've got to have some box stacks. They've got to have some maps that are coded and keyed. They've got to have some random tables that give them something to work from. They need that so that they can start to get reps. When they start to get reps, then they can play in Finchland and go with some Tomb of Adventure design, start really going and being more provoked by what's happening here, as opposed to getting comfortable with the system, figuring out how to make sure that everyone has a good time. These are all the typical neuroses of the beginning game master. So.
Yeah. I mean, I like using modules, but and that's what I did with my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign on the hex map. I popped some modules down, but Lamentations modules aren't linear. They're more like a place that you're going to get horribly murdered if you're not playing smart.
Destination. I haven't read too many of them. You get. I think I have Vaginas Are Magic just because I bought it because it's a great title. And
it's a great book.
Yeah, it's okay. And I love Lamentations. The art direction in that is like, and the quality of the books. But when it comes to the design, so you're saying, are they destination created?
Basically, like there might be like a classic hook. There might be a hook. Like one of my favorite, and actually was one of my favorite sessions in my campaign. It was like the first TPK. It was a Temple of the Stargazer, and it's just like the setup is there's like this tower the Tower of the Stargazer out in the middle of nowhere, and there's this perpetual storm over it, and lightning is striking it, and people talk about that. There's like this storm that won't go away out in the woods. Can you go check it out if you want? That kind of thing. And so you show up, and this is what I love about James Radji's game design. He just seems to understand how players are. I call it the Radji psychological method of game design, because he knows players are going to push the big red button when they shouldn't, and that's when the horror begins. So and I absolutely love
Do you
that
find
module.
that your style has the more and more that you really sunk? Because I think you really started with Lamentations around 2020, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. Do you find that you've gotten
We were
more
there for his
creating that
conversion.
agent provocateur situation to really, like, how do you feel? How has running that game changed you as a game master? I find that I'm interested in that respect.
Oh, I love the fact that I don't prep. Like I remember we'd have to we'd argue about this too. Gary would get all upset with me because I'd have like all this prep I do. But this was more like background, like this just stuff that I would prep in preparation for session one. And then I would prep for the next session, kind of like what Professor Dungeon Master does. I did 90% of the work, then found some players and started playing. I literally just pressed play. I literally I keep saying literally. It's because it's getting late. Last night, I only had 2 players because my Brian, the other player, had something going on. And I said, well, he's going to have to deal with this thing that happened anyway. So you guys can go off and do whatever it is that you want to do. But this is what happened at the last session. And then I paused and I said, what do you guys want to do? Like, I took no notes. I had nothing. I just was like, okay, let's see what happens. And that's why you have random tables, just to be like, oh, look, there's orcs behind the door or whatever, how it is. So I would prefer to play a game like that now, where I just give me the time to get everything set up, get the NPCs. And I actually am now, because that was more OSR, that experiment campaign was more OSR than I had ever done in my life. And I think my next campaign is going to be a little bit more, I guess, maybe toward a little bit more modern, where I'm going to have NPCs fleshed out a little bit more with like maybe timelines or something with how they, plan to do whatever it is they're doing. Obviously, the players could muck it all up, in which case, this Lamentation of Elemental Evil campaign is giving me the practice and the confidence to be all like, oh yeah, you messed up my plot. No big deal. Because it's not a plot. It was just a timeline. And now the timeline's changed. And I think I can still go on the fly.
Did you find that the more that you've gotten into and spent these reps of Lamentations of Elmanu, that it was a harder pull trying to pull in these concepts from Lamentations style of design into this 1985 design mega dungeon, or was it harder to pull the mega dungeon into the Lamentations format of presenting encounters or situations? Like, where was the harder tug of war for you in trying to, because that's what a lot of OSR is we try to bridge sometimes these things together, and they don't always play well. Like, and
Yeah,
that's the
I,
struggle. That's where households come from. That's where rulings come from. It's where it all is
yeah.
born.
No, that's actually a great question, and the answer to that question actually should be the answer to a question you asked a little while ago, because I completely forgot about it. One of the things I realized, because Lamentations does not have magic tables. Magic is rare and crazy and evil, and you got to be careful with it. Well, I decided to say, screw it. The players find a Gary Gygax +1 short sword. They're going to find it. I decided that's going to be it's a fun thing for them to have. Though I did seed in certain homebrew encounter areas on the map some special weapons that were cursed, but one thing I had to think about was, in Lamentation, the elves are not immune to paralyze from ghouls. So ghoul encounters were like deadly. In fact, I had a second TPK because of it. So I tapped into a theme I've been running with since the 90s, which is technology versus magic. So firearms can hurt magical creatures, low-level magical creatures. The more powerful ones, you are going to need some kind of magic. So there's like this. It's kind of like the Great Equalizer. Like the magic user is going to go by the wayside because now the common man can carry a pistol. That kind of concept, and I kind of incorporated that. But that wasn't right away because I just was like, okay, I got everything set up, let's go. And then within a few sessions, I was like, oh, well, I've always used this, I'll just use it now, and this kind of went with it. So, but again, a lot of it though, I sort of played off the players too. Like they're like, when they first got to the temple, they shattered all the stained glass windows and melted down the little metal bars that held them into place to make ammunition. And I'm thinking the whole place radiates evil. Well, I was like, you guys literally made yourself magic shot for your pistols because of what you did. And they spent the time in game to do it, to load up. I mean, they arrived at the temple with like an army of about 50, 60 men. Like they laid siege on the temple and they've been doing forays. It's been like a war game almost. So I wanted to reward them with some of their ingenuity. They were building like barricades to like wall off certain sections of the dungeon so they could be safe while they travel through other sections. They've taken control of level 1. Level 2 is and then this last session they freed her. Zukmoy, the demon prince of fungi. So things are just going to get more interesting.
You had not used the trappings of Temple of Elemental Evil and you used any other typical, I don't know, mega dungeon draw, do you think that it would have just had it would have been more, I want to say more raggy, more like it would. Do you think it would, or was there ever a tug of war happening in terms of like the trying to maintain this old school theme from this traditionally designed with the raggyization of how the Lamentations.
Well, honestly, and this is not a knock against any of my players, though there were a few in their initial crew that kind of were grumbling a little bit. But what I've noticed in the OSR, everyone wants to be OSR until it's time to be OSR. And when I played rules as written, I'd be like, nope, it's time for morale check. Oh, your dude's running away. What? And I'm like, oh, nope, you're at -1 hit point. You're down. Well, how come I can't? Well, can we start with max hit points? I'm like, no, that's not in the rules. I just being that strict made the game scary. So I didn't need to ragify anything up. I just lean into the descriptions and just stay with the rules as written mechanics, right? So like with the ghoul encounter, I was dirty. I fought a little dirty. One guy went down. It was at 0 hit points. So technically he's still conscious per the rules. So you know what that ghoul did? Finished the job. Spent the next round just tearing into it. And I described the intestines and the squishiness of the meat. I went into it.
If you ever want to shock a 5e player, just keep hitting them when they're down.
Yep.
That you will absolutely, it is a shock. And I told my players, I was like, depending on the beast, depending on the intellect, you can expect that if you drop, it is not going to stop. You're going to burn through your death saves very, very quickly. And it's
yeah. So, but I did stuff like that. And, but we also had fun too. I mean, Lamentations has also got some gonzo elements. I incorporated a module from Kelvin Green called More Than Meets the Eye. It's literally a ripoff of Transformers, and I put St. Michael's Bay on the map. So they went to this St. Michael's Bay and they had to fight transforming monsters. It was fun. Everyone was a little weird. That was like the weirdest we got. But it was fun, and they're actually carrying the matrix of leadership with them. So the raggy stuff is like the modules I put in, and then this is the most normal aspect is the Temple of Elemental Evil. But even the descriptions,
too, right? Because that was
the top floor of the temple. The top floor of the temple. I mean, Gary Gygax was a pervert, man. The pillars are described like penises. I mean, I was like, holy crap, this is perfect. I didn't even realize how perfect it was. Not that I have any weird fetishes or anything, but but you know what I mean. But I haven't really. My biggest problem, and this has nothing to do with game design or anything. It's just I don't like the layout of the book. I really, it's not my favorite Mega Dungeon. I just read
Sure,
Stone Hell. I just read Stone Hell through Night Haunted Halls, the first 6 levels, and it's done. The layout is perfect. Like you don't need to prep anything. You can just pick it up and run it. So, but anyway, we're kind of digressing a little bit. But
Gary, I have a question for you. So, when during the Everyday Heroes, mini campaign, running through that with the whole Luna County 1970s, you're not a game master in terms of mastery of the rules because it's a new system, but at the same time, you're
Right.
trying to create this mastery of an experience. Like, what was that like? Taking about probably the closest crack you've ever had at 5e, right? And having to merge it with a really
Yeah,
compelling narrative, by the
for
way.
any
It
for
was
any
just so
regular
good. It was very immersive, very thematic.
um so that game was, man, that game was odd on a lot of fronts. I thought it went really well, especially for like a game that was, here I am like being a hypocrite, but it was so steeped in like lore and story. Um the 5e rules were bullshit, and it's why I don't
Yeah,
play it now,
firearms are terrible. There's no way.
you
It's
know.
the combat theater. You can really
Well, it's not just that. It's that I don't care what anybody says. You've got to have a map and minis or
to play
map and
5e.
tokens. You just have
Yeah,
to.
it's the biggest
Yeah,
drawback.
and everybody says no, you don't. You can do theater of their mind, but with the feats and all, it's especially in that game. Like I think your character had a feat where like you moved so far away from somebody and they saved. If they didn't make their save, they would come into your
Yeah,
ambush, or you know what I'm talking about. Like
it's very
it was
gritty, like
and you just
GRIDY.
it was
Gritty.
very gritty, and I
Yeah,
just don't
yeah.
care about that
Stands
shit,
still, brings plays.
and then just like 5e D&D, where, man, because there's a story and because there are things you guys are trying to kind of figure things out and get to the bottom of something, um just like every other 5e anything, it becomes this long series of conversations and perception roles, right?
Why do you
Like
think it felt like
lots
that?
of perception roles, because that's what it was. It was the rules of, I think okay, that game is designed for superhero combat.
Agreed.
Okay, that's where, I mean, when you look at the rules and you see like how much space these different things take up, it's built for character customization and then combat at a superhero-ish level, right? Because it was a modern day setting, I was like, well, fuck yeah, let's use this because I have all these, I fantasy's not my I like fantasy, I love fantasy games, but it's not like my first choice. If I could find a really good wretched modern day role playing game, Red Room, um, that could handle that, I would probably do that more. Maybe not right now because I'm definitely going through a thing with OSC and stuff, but I would probably play that more than I would anything else. I'm really interested in modern day
yeah,
role playing, high
Did
tech
you ever feel like a
or
designer
ish,
during the Everyday Heroes mini campaign, or did you ever feel
No, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. By the time that was done, the reason that we wound that down so quickly, because one, I was losing. I knew I was going to lose at least 2 players, just because that's what happens in games. And also, I fucking hated those rules, and it got to the point where, like, my prep, I would look up the bad guys, and I would have their stat blocks ready. I would find a map. You know what I mean? That was because that was a different kind of game. And here's like bringing it back to the row, which I'm running right now. You guys, because of the kind of gamers that you were, I set that game up to not be location based, but and this is going to sound dumb to a lot of people, but when you have a story, I think this is how it works. It was NPC
That makes
based.
sense.
You you couldn't get from point A to point B without dealing with an NPC. But that's what that game was. That game was secrets. And I mean dark fucking secrets and history and lore and curses and all of those things. But you guys, because of not because of your experience, but just because that's the style of games y'all play and you were inquisitive and proactive and everything, you were like, well, fuck, let's do this. To the point where, like I said, I was splitting the party. I got so comfortable splitting the party with you guys that when I had to do a lore dump, I split the party. In one session, I had a major NPC death. You were out, your character was out doing whatever the fuck she was doing. She was getting the lowdown on the ghost, remember? Because you had that the guy kept showing up. I had Isaac's character on the Gulf Coast with another character. It was all NPC based. And that didn't work because of the system. It worked because of the players. And because I had really done, like before we started, I had really drilled down and kind of knew how everything.
Well, you hit on it because with
right?
Supers games, location based doesn't really work unless there's an event. NPC based, Supers game have much. Having run Marvel superheroes for about 7-8 years, like if you get it NPC based, because that's where the reason why Daredevil Born Again was refilmed and brought back from the ground up is because they realized it wasn't NPC based. Karen and Foggy help complete the Matt Murdock character.
That's true. That's true.
So for Supers games to really have legs, you can easily get by with a location base, and all the early old Supers modules and adventures were location based. That's how it was. But as you had to go ahead and draw out the West Coast Avengers or the Defenders over 2 or 3 years of playing, you couldn't get by. You had to start using Moira McTaggart. You had to start using characters that were going to draw the players in, because otherwise, why are the superheroes doing? And the other thing, split the party is the best way towards becoming a more proficient game master. The more you split the party, the better.
Depending on the game, I don't agree.
And running more.
I think that depends on the game. I do, because here's the thing. So I've been in the OSE headspace, the Acts 2 headspace. I've been in the real sort of simulationist headspace. I don't think that works for fairy games. I think you have to, because there's some planning that goes behind knowing the party's going to be split. Right? Now, like there's a little bit of planning. Like if you think about that lore episode, like I don't think we made a die roll that whole fucking game. You know, that whole session.
No, it was very smart. But all the players were bought in because the groundwork had been laid and the legwork had been made, and so everyone was already okay. We're in this. It was very evocative, so it compelled us to interact and to be immersed and role play, not in voices but in choices.
Exactly. And here, I'm going to tell you why that game worked. And it's going to,
that's a bumper sticker, by the way.
Relevant to the game I'm running now. When I was planning Luna, the whole point of that story, it has to do with your lineage, right? Your family has to, like, the way that people were magic in that game is that your family had been in this cursed area for so many generations, right? So your characters had to have roots there. So before we started the game, I had made out all the NPCs. And then I had the idea, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to attach, when we do character creation, I'm going to offer to attach the player characters to these NPC families. Right? You being you're like, no. It's just grandma in the woods or whatever. Right? But I had already made out the
Hmm.
McCall family, that the one guys, and I was like, hey, you know what? Would you want to play as this is how you grew up here in this town? Because I needed you guys to be from a lineage. So to really drive that home, I connected those characters with families I had already created. So they kind of had this seeped in background. They didn't have any motivations. I never said your character wants this. I just said, this is where you're from. This is what your family does. And then that kind of formed a lot. Like session one, people had things they wanted to do. So, and that's so
Well, I mean,
story
this kind of goes
gamey,
back to
right?
the whole.
That's so fucking
When
story
Matt
gamey.
titled this episode, "You're a game master." You're a game master, and you weren't familiar with the rule set, so you're making lemonade
I was
enough,
familiar enough,
enough,
man.
but
It's
but
roll
but it's
over
easy to fall
with,
into the perception check trap. A lot of new 5e GMs fall into the perception check trap. I try to rarely do I ever call for perception checks unless it's truly a moment. But you mastered the game in terms of knowing your players, knowing your themes, and being able to have the rules serve as a scaffolding, but not necessarily full
yeah.
gospel. Because you had to play jazz. You weren't an expert in the system. So you were a game master, damn it.
Well, I'm real, yeah, I'm real proud of that game. I'm real proud of the majority of sessions of that game because you guys were bought in. Like it's some of the heaviest buy-in I've had on a game where I've had a story, you know? And but there are a couple sessions where I was just like, ah, fuck, man, I forgot to do this or I should have done that, you know.
It's hard to
Um,
sometimes. Uh, First off, we second guess ourselves, right? That's what makes us get better at our craft. Is always second guessing. That's a good trait to
mhm.
have. Um, but that confidence, that assertiveness, again, you're a game master, Dan. Like Matt, whenever you put that as the title, for the whole for this session here, which it's been an absolute privilege and honor to catch up with you guys and do this. I'm having way too much fun. I'm probably keeping my
It is fun. I missed this. It's been
because
great.
we're all very different. But you're a game master, Dan. That assertiveness. Um, do you feel that that is something that is just not fully realized in the majority of games? Is it lacking? Why is it such an aftertaste right now? Do you feel maybe in the
Well, to kind of go back to like the beginning of the whole thing where I was trying not to go on to a
I'm not
tirade.
retired.
There's there uh, there's uh,
For it.
there's there's a lot in the some of the bigger names in the OSR, some of the younger guys. I don't want to name names because I don't want to start any drama or anything. But they do have they do have their shtick and everything, whether it's rules, zero prep to rules is written strict, and their arguments aren't bad. They're actually pretty good. One of them, the one I like the most, is rules is written is the lingua franca, right? It's how you communicate to your players. So if you show up with all these random stuff that's changed in the book and you have new players coming to your table, it's like you're speaking a separate language. So I appreciate that. But like I said, I think there's this tension. Like, I'm more than a referee. And when you look at the early parts of the game, even Gary Gygax is like, well, I got this book, do what you want with it, and then you look at like the Metzger Red Box, he talks about that too. And it's sort of been built into the culture. And when you talk like Rob Kuntz, which started the reason why I wanted to have Griff on last week is because of the little kerfuffle with him. He that whole kerfuffle started with him just simply saying, no, we actually didn't use chainmail. We were experimenting with a lot of different things. And that was another thing. I was just like, what are you doing? And then when you think about the dynamic of players, the very different players, your friends, the relationships, and at the end of the day, this is why I actually was originally titling the Griff live stream Gaming the Imagination. That's what we're doing. We're putting rules to this infinite thing, the human imagination. And how hard is that? That's a challenge. That's why Alexander Macris, for example, is someone to look up to because he's actually trying to create a world, right? And I think he may be successful with what he's been doing, right? But that aside, I think that's one of the reasons why I like OSR so much, the ruling over rules. It offers that flexibility because I don't know what's going on in your head, Gary's head. You know, when like I said earlier, like I want to be able to say, yeah, I swing my sword and I'm going to try to position him so I kick him off the bridge. You know, I want to be able to do that. And do we need a rule for that? I don't think so. You know, that's why we have ruling over rules. And if you're the game master,
has a rule for that.
I'm sure they do. And then as a game master, you know, the fun part of being a game master is coming up with a cool world, coming up with a cool backstory for your world. I don't advise lore dumping on everybody, but that to me is your character when you're the game master. Your character is the world, and your random tables, your NPCs, your geography, your weird history, that's how you express your character. And I just sort of see this pushback, like where people make fun of world builders, or they automatically assume that if you're into like rule zero type tinkering, that somehow you're a deficient game master and like you're trying to screw everybody up or whatever. And to me, not doing that is not not indicative of game mastery. If that makes sense. Like, you're a game master, have the confidence to build something, for an experience with your players, and it's more than just tinkering with rules. Though I want to make that clear. It's a lot. You need to know who you're going to be playing. You need to know what the parameters are. And I don't think game masters should be embarrassed, and you sure shit should be showing up to a table wearing a black and white striped shirt with a number on it. You're more than a fucking referee.
I think you should have that shirt on underneath your jacket at least.
Oh, I that's fair. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. You should be a neutral arbiter, but I want to. But I just want to say, the referee.
There's no definition for it.
I don't think I think you can define it loosely, but like referee has become like this thing that's been placed on a pedestal as if it's the primary, and I just disagree with that. It's important, just like cut. Awesome. I think, you know, having the storyteller hat is fine. I also joke sometimes you're wearing the HR hat because you have player disputes you got to resolve, which actually happened last year with me, you know. So, but you're a game master, you know, have fun with it, and don't be afraid to be one. So, I don't know if that answered your question. I'm
gonna tell you that I mostly agree with almost everything you said. My biggest takeaway from having Griff on the show last week, and we started talking about this before the show, but I wanted to save it. You know, my biggest takeaway is I would start talking in like modern game parlance, right? I would throw out terms or whatever. And it would just annoy him more and more every time I did it. And at one point I said, so when you're starting a campaign, and I swear to God, his eyes like rolled up in the back of his head.
I remember seeing that.
You could hear him just like thunk. You know what I mean? I was like, oh shit, right? And he was just like, you know, I'm just playing a game where there's that. And then when you pay attention to that conversation, a lot of times he would say something like, my game or my dungeon, you know, well, we're in my dungeon, you know. And then I asked him, like, do you play multiple parties in dungeon? He says yes. And what it seems like to me is that we're sweating a lot of details. We're, details that may or may not matter to players. We're sweating a lot of details. We're the worry, the concern. But what if I do this? But what if I do that? And I think if anything, you know, that attitude, which is kind of like what you were just talking about. Well, try it, man. See what happens. If it doesn't work, don't do it. You know? And it was such a casual attitude to have about a game that nobody seems to take casually anymore. You know, and this is coming from somebody who's got the background and, you know, all of that. And he's not sweating this shit. He ain't giving, you know,
exactly.
Was your game fun? You know, and I think his, you know, I don't think he ever said that he would, sacrifice the logic of the game, the basic logic of the world to
Oh,
have a good
sure.
time.
Yeah.
But that's what it comes down to, is like, well, this is what we're gonna do. We're just gonna do it
Well,
like
the
this.
rule of cool is the most non-punk rock phrase you could ever say in relation to running. It's really the antithesis of it.
Hmm.
And in our like when, and by the way, his eye roll on the whole campaign, I adored it because the
Yeah.
thing is that
Oh, I laughed.
both of you, to me, were correct and were genuine and true in your feelings about it. Because at the end of the day, that is the common trait that's most necessary when we are at the table is passion. If Griff is passionate about it not feeling like a campaign or within this certain paradigm and that it's absolutely just this free expanse, yeah, winning.
Hmm.
And if you feel that having these, because you hop a lot between all these romantic systems that draw and provoke your curiosity and your imagination and your passion,
Right.
players are going to really stay at tables where there's at least that as the battery, and then it powers the table. Passion is just such a big part. Passion is not personality. Passion is, are you passionate about the system? Are you passionate about how it's going to connect to the world building? And like, is there going to be a nice good mashup with that? Passion is, are you passionate about the characters? You guys give me grief, but I'm passionate about characters. As long as there's passion, you can win. You can win at role playing games. You absolutely can. You will win more often when there's passion at the table. So that's, I don't know.
And I'd just like to point out, Gary, everything
Yeah.
he just said, there's not a single rule for that.
I just like to point out that's why I think it's all a crock of shit.
By the way, I do have a
No,
confession.
hey,
I'm
but
guilty of
here's
rule of cool. I'm guilty of rule of cool. It's with my 12-year-old niece. It's
Oh
with
yeah.
the person who's new at the table. My friend Jessica, she's 43 years old, 44 years old. She works in child protective services. She has to see and deal with things I can never fathom, but she loves D&D because her younger cousin plays it, and he's 22 years old, and he's from South America. And she's like, will you run games for us? So I run games for them, and she's just rule of cool. I rule of cool for her. I did,
so
and they adored it. Am I going to rule of cool with
rule
my
of
paid game?
cool.
No, no, no. They're
Rule
going
if
to.
I'm if I were able to sit down my 6-year-old and my 8-year-old to play a game, I would choose a rules light game, and it would be rule of cool all day long,
Yeah.
right? So it sure for, but then again, see, and the other side of my head is like, nah, fuck you. You better teach them the rules, or they're gonna be,
Sure.
upstart whiny
There's
little
a
shits
code,
their whole life,
consequences.
and
Yeah.
so
I did that
it's
with my stepson. Yeah. You
yeah.
like
So
I ruled a cooled it with my son with a solo Shadow Dark game. I almost killed him in the first session. In fact, he almost died. He got lucky and rolled that natural 20 on the death save. Woke up with 1 hit point. The thugs that jumped him basically took all this crap. He was a little upset with me, but you know what he did? He left the town, told me he wanted to build a fishing pole, started fishing, went back into town, sold the fish, and got himself a sword, and then he got or a hammer, and then he got his revenge, and it was very satisfying. But I would just the rule of cool with the kids, but that's another set of factors you, the game
yeah,
master, got to think
it's
about before boom, this is the game. So
Were you
real
anyway,
transparent
quick.
with the roll
Real
result with the DC
yeah.
before?
I roll. I'm taking on the philosophy of rolling in front of everybody.
Always.
I don't use dungeon
Yeah.
screens anymore.
Yeah. Good.
So
When my oldest, before I got remarried and had 3 kids, when I had an only child, I ran a DCC funnel, and he played. I killed every fucking one of his characters. There was no fudging. There was no rule of cool. His favorite little gnome took a spear to the chest and was impaled on the dungeon wall by turn 5. Not kidding. Like, I say I would use rule of cool for the kids, but or rule 0. I didn't. Fuck no. I killed all 4 of those little bastards he rolled up. So, and I didn't feel bad about it at all. Oh. All right,
All right.
guys, we got 1 minute. Brian, it was good having you, man. Be
Yeah.
here. Brian, I told Matt earlier today that you're gonna wind up. I don't know, man. Here's some hippie music trivia bullshit nobody cares about. You're gonna wind up being our Tim Reynolds. You know,
I
you're
don't
just
know.
gonna. Yeah, Tim Reynolds is this guitar player that plays with Dave Matthews, and for like 20 years he
Oh
was
God, I hate
able
Dave.
to. Yeah, well, he was just able to. He's so good, but he would
I'm
just
sure
kind of
he's
like show
good.
up to a gig if he wanted to play that night and make money or
Oh, okay,
not.
yeah.
You know what I mean? He just kind of did that thing. And I was like, this is going to be Brian. He's going to wind up being our Tim Reynolds. He's going to show
If
up
you guys will
somewhere.
have me, I listening to you two the last few weeks and just kind of catching in the whole theology of what it is and why we do this thing and having these dialogues. Well, first off, it rejuvenates, right? Like we go back to our tables and we come away with just like those little epiphanies. But also, I don't know, I'm just strangely comforted by y'all's deep baritone voices. So, I just, I always come away a better student of the game, which I
We
think is.
told you Brian was sensitive.
Yeah, well,
You call me sensitive, but if you talk to my players, I guarantee you they're going to get some different adjective than sensitive.
you are very attuned to your players' needs.
That's a good word, Gary. I like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It's midnight. Get us the fuck out of here, Brian. Our watch is over.
Yep.
Excuse me, Matt. Get us out of here.
Yes, our watch is over. Thanks everyone for joining us. Brian, you know you're always welcome. And we'll see you next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll figure it
I
out.
know as long as y'all have me, it'll be fun. So.
We're gonna talk about my shit.
Yes, we'll talk about West March. No, we should because I put a note here. A guy that I was talking to last night, I kind of know him through Facebook. He texted me because he's trying to put together a game at his local gaming store and he needed some advice. I gave him some and I'm like, hey, we might talk about it on the second watch tomorrow night. He's like, really? That'd be great. Sorry, Mike, we didn't. But next week we will.
All right. Cool, man.
All right. Everybody, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. And I don't know, take it easy.
Go play games.